right, I guess that's our start. This is a very big conference with many simultaneous things, and I understand that we're online as well. So we welcome everybody to this conversation, kindly and generously sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we're focusing today on the evolving global maritime security landscape and the corresponding international response. My name is Professor Gordon Flake. I'm the CEO of the Perth U.S. Asia Center at the University of Western Australia. I'm on Australia's Indian Ocean side, and it's my great honor to moderate a fantastic conversation. With the exception of Madam Ambassador, we're very fortunate that the panel here has already had a meeting yesterday in Seoul. We had an opportunity to meet together with leading officials at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and from other agencies in the government to discuss maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. And so it's a great honor for us to continue that conversation here at the Jeju Forum. Let me begin by just introducing our panel. I'll then give a little bit of a framing introduction to the topic and the issues we're going to cover. And then I'll kick off with kind of a broad question for each of our panels in the order that we're on the program. Our first speaker will be Dr. Isaac Benjamin Carden, who's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C. I think many of you will be very familiar with the Carnegie Endowment. Isaac has tremendous expertise in China, and obviously the reason we're talking about maritime security is because of challenges to what we would long consider to be the rules-based order. Things are not the same today as they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And so we're very fortunate to have somebody that can bring a Washington, D.C. perspective, but also can bring a perspective from understanding some of the fundamental challenges that we face as a region in terms of what Chinese strategy is, what Chinese actions are. Then we're very fortunate to have all the way from Paris, Marc Julien, who's the director of the Center for Asian Studies at the French Institute of International Relations, IFRI. Obviously, France, you might think of France as a European country, but France actually has the largest EEZ in the world, the exclusive economic zone. I was corrected by Mark on this because I'm used to talking about the Indo-Pacific, and I'm from Australia, so I said Australia has the largest EEZ in the Indo-Pacific, and France is second in the region, but globally France leads. And also it's very important, Mark and his team and France have been really important thinking about our global interests in this region in particular, particularly the underlying aspects of the rules-based order that impact our discussion of maritime security. And then we're very fortunate to have Anil Kumar Chalwa, retired Vice Admiral. He's with the Council of Strategic and Defense Research, former commander of the Indian Navy's Southern Command, also a commander of a aircraft carrier for the Indian Navy. So he brings not only an Indian perspective and an Indian Ocean perspective, a good important half of the Indo-Pacific, but he also brings a real practitioner's and scholar's eye to these issues. We're very fortunate to have Admiral Chalwa with us. And then finally, joining us for the first time today, we're really particularly honored to have with us Ambassador Maria Teresa Dijon-Devega. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but I probably wish it a little bit. Ambassador Dijon-Devega is the ambassador of the Philippines to the Republic of Korea. And while all of us are kind of talking about this on a theoretical level, in the real hot spot when it comes to maritime security, there's no country that's more involved on a daily basis than the Philippines. They're a claimant in the South China Seas. They have had a very important leadership role in getting a UN Special Tribunal decision in their favor when it came down to maritime security. But more importantly, they're at the front face of this. And so as you can tell, we've got a magnificent panel. Let me just take just a moment before I kick off with our panelists in turn to say, why are we talking about this? We are in Korea, where Korea only 2 years ago finally began to use the term Indo-Pacific, right? Korea usually used the word Ate Pyongyang, the Asia Pacific. But in December of 2022, the Korean Foreign Ministry put out an Indo-Pacific strategy, which matched the Japanese program for a free and open Indo-Pacific, which matched the French led in Europe on an Indo-Pacific strategy. It matched the decision on the part of the United States to change the name of the Pacific Command in Hawaii to the Indo-Pacific Command. It matched the decision of ASEAN and ASEAN states to have an Indo-Pacific outlook. And candidly, India has also been a very important leader on that. Prime Minister Modi gave the keynote speech at the 2018 Shangri-La Dialogue, and by my count, used the term Indo-Pacific some 8 times. And obviously, you don't have an Indo-Pacific without India. And so that's a really important thing to understand, that the Indo-Pacific by construct cannot exist without maritime security. Most regions in the world are defined by land and defined by land borders. The Indo-Pacific is defined by maritime space and maritime borders. And historically, in almost every country around the world, we thought about seas and oceans as barriers, as obstacles. Australia has long had this notion of the tyranny of distance because we were so far away from the United Kingdom of Europe in terms of the process. But in beginning with the idea of the Asia Pacific, which again was largely united by oceans, the Indo-Pacific is an expansion of that construct, where the thing that ties all of us together is our maritime space. And our ability to be a region as an Indo-Pacific, from Korea all the way down into India, and depending on your definition, all the way to the east coast of Africa, depends on sea lanes of communication, maritime security, efforts to combat terrorism, efforts to combat into illegal trafficking, illegal fishing in the region. But more importantly, it depends on what we would consider to be the rules-based order or the international legal framework for the maritime space. So in other words, without maritime security, you don't have national security in this region. Without maritime security, you don't have economic security. And so this is a topic that is not esoteric. It's very real. So I'm going to start in turn, and kind of following the introductions I gave, I'm going to start with Isaac, because you've spent a lot of time in China. You spent a lot of time thinking about Chinese strategy, but you're also in Washington, D.C. So I'm wondering if you might just kick off 5 to 7 minutes for this audience and those watching online. What do we need to know about what is different today, and more importantly, what is China doing? What is their intention? And then if you could share some U.S. insights on that as well.
My pleasure, and thanks for the kind introduction, Gordon, and thanks very much to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of South Korea for bringing us together and giving us a chance to discuss this most important of subjects. As noted, I do sit in Washington, D.C. on a regular basis, but in a previous era, spent a lot of time in China, to include in Hainan province, sort of the Jeju of China, as it were, on the other side of the and another part of the littoral here, and it's a real pleasure to be here in Korea and getting a chance to look across the seas at China and see what it looks like from here. So let me offer and maybe reinforce the point that Gordon made just by way of introduction, which is that the big thing that has changed in this region from a maritime security perspective, as well as from an economic perspective, and just about any perspective that you care to consider, is of course the growth of Chinese power. That's what's changed the perceptions of those in the regions, what's changed certainly the military balance of power in some fundamental ways, and we're all reckoning with it in our own ways. From Washington, at a safe remove, in a sense, there's been quite a significant fixation on the prospects for conflict over Taiwan. You no doubt have heard quite a lot about it from American officials, and from my perspective in D.C., working on security issues, you hear quite a lot about this idea of China as the pacing challenge or pacing threat for the United States, particularly for the Department of Defense. And that's not something that is specific to this current administration in Washington. It is something that's been evolving over time and has very much been a reaction to the expectation that because China has these unrealized territorial ambitions, then necessarily there must be some action taken. And I think the idea of a 2027 deadline for the People's Liberation Army to be able to achieve unification with Taiwan has really fueled a lot of imaginations that that's necessarily what's going to happen. And so you see a real degree of worry and concern in Washington, and I share the concern, but not the focus on this one singular event of a major amphibious invasion of Taiwan. To my mind, that would be out of keeping with what we've observed from China's strategy, not just in the maritime domain, but across the board. And so I certainly would not discourage us from considering what that eventuality might look like or making worst case plans, but want folks in the region, in consultation with Washington, to start thinking a little bit more about what are the more likely scenarios and what are we going to do about them. China's strategy thus far has not been to force a confrontation with the United States, and I think invading Taiwan is really one of the only things that they could do that would bring that about prematurely from China's perspective, I would suggest. What we've been watching over a long period of time, if you can just zoom out a little bit, is an effort to slowly push American power out of the region, in part by undermining its system of alliances in the region. And one of the effective instruments of that has been what's come to be known as these gray zone tactics. Another way of describing the gray zone has also been salami slicing, and I actually think this metaphor is a useful one because, there's only so many times that you can slice a salami before you hit a finger. It's not an infinite. The metaphor actually offers it, and I am looking to my counterpart at the far end, and perhaps our ambassador from the Philippines will recall that a Philippine sailor, in fact, lost a thumb in the context of a uniquely aggressive Chinese gray zone action. And I think one of the things that tells you is that there's only so far that these gray zone actions can go before they start to run into the reality that in order to achieve your political objective, you may need to escalate further than you're comfortable with. And so when I look out at the region, what I see is, that example from last summer in and around the Second Thomas Shoal in the South China Sea, I think is illustrative of a general class of problem that we're more likely to confront than a major amphibious invasion where everybody's clear that this is an act of Chinese aggression. What we're more likely to see are events that make it very difficult for everybody to agree on what's the nature of this Chinese action. How should we characterize it? Is this a blockade? Is this a quarantine? Is this a lethal use of force that was intentional? Is this an accidental collision? There are a whole variety of different scenarios that I think of as being much, much more likely, and that will confound our ability, even just in Washington, to describe and decide and take decisive actions to mitigate a threat, to resolve a crisis, to de-escalate. And that problem is only compounded when you start to think about all the coordination that'll be required in the region with partners and allies. So I guess before we solve that problem, maybe I'll admire it for a moment here, throw it on the table and suggest that the maritime security problems that we're most likely to confront are in fact the ones that we're already confronting, and they're just coming up to some edges of possibility, following this salami slicing metaphor. Yes, it doesn't make sense to escalate on the basis of one marginal minor change. This is what the salami slicing metaphor tries to capture. But ultimately, there's some finite amount of times that you can make these marginal changes. And when we look at what China's accomplished over the last 10 or 20 years in terms of effective control over maritime space, there's really not that much further to go other than starting to seize control over features, islands, rocks, etc., that are unoccupied, which could cause regional strife, or potentially of occupied features. And we've already seen this happen in an earlier generation with Vietnam in the 1970s and the 1980s. And I think that we're in a position now where there's a confluence of circumstances in the region that I think make that type of crisis quite likely, quite probable, in fact, and yet I think the security architecture that's been developed over the course of the post-war era is really focused on these large-scale conventional military threats. And I think reorienting around the more likely scenarios is going to be most conducive to maintaining a stable region. So let me close there and
Well, thank you, Isaac. You've made it very clear, number one, why we're talking about this. And you've also made it very clear that the issues we're talking about are not in the future, that they're real, they're happening today. And again, I think your focus on the dark gray, the gray zone is quite appropriate. Mark, we're going to turn to you next. I mentioned already the role that we know that France already plays. I'm going to ask you to explain some from French views, but also to take a broader European approach, because in addition to France's leadership on understanding and thinking about its interests in the Indo-Pacific, there have also been British, Italian, German, and other warships in this region. It does seem to me that Europe has an interest in maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. I welcome your views.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you very much for having me on this terrific panel and on this beautiful island of Jeju. It's very nice for me to go after Isaac, because I entirely share your assessment, what you said. So it's even easier for me to present a European perspective on how do we consider maritime security in Europe, in the Indo-Pacific. So I would not teach anyone in this room that the world is connected, especially in economic terms. So a risk on peace and stability in one part of the world has consequences on the other part. And today, the Indo-Pacific has the largest part of the economy, of the global trade, but also the largest population. And so the consequences of the degradation of peace and stability in this region has immediate direct impact on European interest. And as a matter of fact, as Isaac just described, the security context in the Indo-Pacific, perhaps even more so in East Asia, has been degrading drastically over the past years. In the South China Sea, in the Strait and surrounding Taiwan, and even more also in the East China Sea. So from Europe, we see this degraded context as a security risk for our interests, for our economy, for mainly three reasons. The first reason is that violations of international law seems to be a trend, not only in the Indo-Pacific, not only in Asia, but this trend is very concerning for the sustainability of this rule-based international order, and more especially in the Indo-Pacific. The second reason is that if law is no longer respected and no longer enforced, it bears consequences and risk for commercial ships and for global trade in the region, but also for the supply chain of the European industry. So this is a very concrete, very immediate risk for the European interest and for the European economy. And last but not least, the third reason why Europe is interested and cares about what's happening in the Indo-Pacific in terms of maritime security is the increase of military activities, and which increase the risk of accidents, you name it, Isaac, at miscalculation or even incidents or escalation of crisis. And this is obviously something that Europe doesn't want to see happen. So the Indo-Pacific is important for Europe. It is perhaps even more important for France for very singular and obvious reason. France has territories in the Indo-Pacific. It has a large EEZ and 1.5 million citizens that it has the duty and the responsibility to protect. So that's why France is ramping up its capability, military capabilities in the region, and it is also increasing its deployments, naval but also air deployments in the region. Very recently, you had the French carrier strike group, Charles de Gaulle, who sailed from Toulon, southern France, to the South China Sea, and to work with many friends, including the Philippines, by the way, which is a growing partner in the region. As we speak, President Macron is making a diplomatic tour in Vietnam, Indonesia, and tomorrow Singapore. He will be the keynote speaker at the Shangri-La Dialogue tomorrow evening. And this shows, in my view, France's commitment to the Indo-Pacific for this very reason, that as a European country, we have interest in the region, but also as a resident country in the Indo-Pacific, we have the responsibility to protect those territories and people. And this is perhaps, hopefully, what the French president will recall tomorrow and try to reassure that France is still and remains committed in the region. Fortunately, France is not the only country in Europe to care about and to involve in the Indo-Pacific. The European Union, as a whole, has produced its own roadmap in 2021. But now, Germany, Lithuania, Poland, Netherlands all have kind of a strategy of a roadmap for the Indo-Pacific. France is not only the only country to deploy military capabilities in the region. Recently, you had Germany, you had the Italian carrier strike group that went to the region. It also allowed us to work together, to cooperate together. We are very, very used to work together in the Mediterranean or in the Atlantic Ocean, but now it's also a way for us to work together in this part of the world. But also Netherlands sends some assets, and the United Kingdom will soon send its own carrier strike group. So, as I just said, it's a way for us to work together, but even more so, it's a way for us, even more so for France, to be able to improve its capability to operate so far from mainland France and from Europe, which is something that is very much challenging. So we cannot do it alone, basically, to be very blunt. And so we need partners, we need friends to work together in this region. As I said, Philippines is one of them. India is perhaps the most important one for France for quite some time now. And we need some new friends. And definitely, I think that South Korea is a country with whom there is a large potential of developing this kind of cooperation, whether it is military, because I emphasize the military aspect, but the France's view of the Indo-Pacific is not only military, it's all kind of non-traditional security matters, but also a matter of development, of economy, trade, and so on and so forth. And so I think I didn't mention Japan, which is already also a great partner of France, and South Korea, I think, is a partner, but with a large margin to increase this partnership and this friendship.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. You made it also very clear that there are legal precedents, systemic-wide implications of these issues. These are not just about individual countries' disputes, but things that kind of impact global commerce, that impact global security. And it is useful to receive from you a perspective not just about France, but what's happening in the broader European community on these issues. Anil, we're going to turn to you now. As mentioned, you don't have an Indo-Pacific without the Indian Ocean. There's a lot more public attention placed on the South China Seas, on the South Pacific even, than there is in the Indian Ocean, but that's a contested space. You obviously have had a practitioner's role, but we'd welcome from you an Indian perspective on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific more broadly, but particularly your views as somebody who's had to defend that maritime security. So,
thank you very much, Gordon, for this kind introduction and a very relevant question, and also to the South Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs for inviting me here. It's a privilege. I've just got a few slides to illustrate what I'm saying. As Gordon mentioned, I've got one slide on a brief history for the benefit of the viewers. As far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, while we are talking about the Indo-Pacific, I'll just first focus on the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific. This has been really a contested space since the arrival of the Europeans in the 15th century. And it continued to be contested between the European colonial powers at that stage. Finally, of course, the Great Britain became the major resident power with France and other countries also present there. But after the decolonization period after the Second World War, the Royal Navy remained, while India, of course, became independent along with many other countries. The Royal Navy remained the guarantor of peace in this region till their withdrawal east of Suez in 1968. Now, after that, the British were largely replaced by the US Navy, and there was a very brief tussle, I would say, for about 15 years between the Soviet and the US navies. But when the Cold War ended, the US Navy, there was a peace dividend. It withdrew from the Pacific to a large extent, but did not really move out from the Indian Ocean region because there were several conflicts, the Gulf War I, the Gulf War II, the other conflicts that erupted in the Middle East, the fact that remained the center of hydrocarbon exports to the US, which is not so relevant right now. But the fact was that this remained. And during the course of this, of course, the Indian Navy developed in strength over a period of years. And since I am from the Indian Navy, I would say we developed a decent reputation for being a stabilizing force in the Indian Ocean region. Now things changed quite dramatically after 2008 when piracy really emerged in the Gulf of Aden. And since then, over 25, sometimes 40 ships from over 25 to 40 navies, depends on the time of the year and the situation that is prevalent, are there present generally in the North Indian Ocean region on a constant basis. And this has included the advent of the PLA Navy, which had never really ventured into the Indian Ocean since then, to enter the PLA Navy, and since 2008 it has maintained a constant presence. And now I would concentrate on the Chinese foray into the Indian Ocean region, which is currently of concern to India. And this is a book that I've recently published, Maritime Power in China's Grand Strategy. And essentially you can see that China's maritime strategy can be divided into 4 phases. And what is of relevance to us, of course, is the last one, that is offshore waters defense with open seas protection, which essentially talks about venturing out into the oceans and protecting their sea lines of communication, protecting their offshore interests, and essentially having a blue water navy which is capable of controlling the seas. Now, even more concerning, I would say, was their publication of the Two Ocean Area. This was the maritime area of interest, which was published in the Science of Military Strategy in 2013, and subsequently repeated after that in the next publication also, which defined the ocean area in which China stated that it needed to be present for resource extraction and for utilization of the seas for its national purposes. Now this is interesting because this includes most of the ocean except the Atlantic and the western part of the Pacific, which adjoins the US. This is what they have defined it as. And this became further clear, the interest in this area, when the Belt and Road Map was published. Now this was published in 2015. This is the official map published by the PRC itself. And the important part is, which I bring out in the book also and which concerns India, is that in 2015 the Belt and Road Initiative was announced in sync with the Open Seas Protection, that is the sea control maritime strategy of the PLA Navy of China itself. And to my mind, this seeks to copy the British Empire's playbook of the 18th and 19th centuries, but in lieu of physical colonization, it aims at the economic subjugation of selected countries in Asia, Africa, and Europe. And even more concerning, apart from the fact that if this was a commercial venture, purely commercial venture, it would not be that issue of concern, but it seeks to establish strategic outposts. The infrastructure that is being constructed is inherently dual use. That's the nature of Chinese construction. And this could be used to develop naval bases in the future. One has already been developed, as you might be aware. In Djibouti, out here, where there's already there. Yeah, it's here. So essentially, now what is happening because of this is the security environment in the Indian Ocean region has been vitiated, and that is something that is of major concern to India, because the permanent presence of China in a naval base, as also the fact that they are developing overland economic corridors through Pakistan called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, as also one through Myanmar, with the ostensible aim of overcoming the Malacca dilemma. That means since their majority of their trade and their exports and their oil and energy supplies pass through the Strait of Malacca, which they feel can be vulnerable in times of a conflict. So they're trying to diversify, but essentially the aim is to be a resident power in the Indian Ocean as well in the future. So that is what really concerns India, and this is being monitored closely. This has been accompanied by a huge increase in deployment of Chinese naval ships, of Chinese research ships, of Chinese fishery trawlers, which are fishing in the high seas. And the combination of all this, including the infrastructure that is being developed in East Africa, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, to some extent in Bangladesh, is something that is of concern, long-term strategic concern to India. Now, as far as India is concerned, as was mentioned by Gordon, the basic outlook of India is that we support a rules-based multipolar world order, and their vision of the Indo-Pacific is a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Now this builds on the Sagar doctrine of India. Sagar in Hindi, the Indian language, means the sea. This basically doctrine actually the acronym stands for security and growth for all in the region. So it's a equitable, open, rules-based outlook. And there are three major pillars in this, that is maritime security, regional collaboration, and sustainable development. And really in sync with this, over a period of the last, I would say since the end of the Cold War, India has developed very close bilateral maritime security partnerships with almost all Indian Ocean region countries and all maritime major countries across the world, and subsequently across the Indo-Pacific as well. So in the initial years, it was just the Indian Ocean region, but this has expanded first to the ASEAN, then to the US, and then beyond to Japan, Australia, and the United States, of course. The vehicles by which we deal, which we can discuss later, as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, is the Indian Ocean Regional Association. And there is a sub-association within the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, BIMSTEC, and the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. The last one is a purely naval, is an organization of navies of the Indian Ocean region. And both the IORA and the BIMSTEC also have maritime security pillars. At the Indo-Pacific level, and as Gordon mentioned, we had announced our Indo-Pacific outlook in 2018. India has been actively engaged in security cooperation through partnerships such as Quad. So Quad today is a very important partnership as far as India is concerned, though we don't principally call it a security partnership, but with the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Agreement coming in, it de facto has a major security component. And of course, the existing maritime security pillars of the ARF, the East Asia Summit, and the in the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which was started by the Indian Prime Minister, which also has a maritime security pillar. So essentially, to conclude, I would say that India currently sees in the Indo-Pacific region China as a major expansionist power, which is expanding its naval forces at an I would say an alarming rate, which is seeking to upend the rules-based order, particularly currently in the South China Sea, and beyond in the Sea of Japan and other areas also, where it has territorial claims. And we feel that this, in sync with their maritime strategy and their Belt and Road Initiative, is something that seeks to dominate this entire region. And the two-ocean strategy, as I mentioned, the two-ocean outlook of China itself provides that broader outlook in which this is happening. So I think there is a requirement, as India is doing, to collaborate with like-minded democracies and try and counter this hegemonistic design that seems to be developing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Admiral. That was extremely clear. Just as a reflection, you referred to what you described as an alarming increase in Chinese naval capacity, both in terms of tonnage and displacement and number of ships, etc. And I'm not sure about this, but my guess, over the last 10 years, the country globally that has probably, other than China, increased its capacity, its tonnage, the number of ships most, is probably India. And yet the international response has been very, very different. There has been a welcoming of Indian capacity to work together with Europe, to work together with Australia, to work together with the Quad, etc. So that's something we'll get back to when we come around this conference. So thank you. Mrs. Ambassador Tess, we're going to go to you. Again, this is not academic for you. You live this every day in terms of your country. I'd welcome your perspectives, both as a Southeast Asian nation, but as a claimant, and candidly as a country that is on the front lines of the stresses that impact maritime security.
Thank you very much, Gordon, and a privilege to once again be on a panel for the Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity on its 20th year, and this is certainly a very timely panel topic. The global maritime security landscape, which is evolving so rapidly, is very, very important for the Philippines. Obviously, we are both a maritime and an archipelagic nation. We have 7,641 islands. That is the official count. That is the official figure, which translates to about 29.8 million hectares of land, but even more significantly, 220 million hectares of waters. And we have, unlike France, we have the fifth largest coastline in the world of about 37,000 kilometers. In effect, we live and breathe, the maritime environment. And for the Philippines, the challenges that we face in terms of the maritime landscape now, I'd like to divide it into at least 4 general categories. The first being, of course, the political and the security challenges. Obviously, the challenges to a rules-based international order, to international law, to international instruments such as the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, decisions of arbitral tribunals such as the 2016 arbitral ruling of the PCA, which the Philippines, of course, brought. I actually had the privilege of being part of the team which worked on that, but that's another story for another day. So all these things, the acts, the assertions which undermine the international rules-based orders is very concerning for the Philippines. The second general area of concern for us would be the economic security, the challenges to economic security in the region. Of course, at the front lines would be, the marginal players like the fisher folk, who, because of increasing tensions in the South China Sea, for example, are being deprived of their regular livelihood. So this is a concern. Coastal communities are impacted by this tension in terms of the maritime security in the region. On a larger, more regional and global scale, the South China Sea, for example, is a maritime space which is really critical for global commerce. About US $3 trillion worth of commerce passes through this very important maritime space. And this is certainly not something that we would like to see tensions continue. In terms of that, it affects, as mentioned by our other panelists, the global supply chain, and it just has a very important domino effect. The third area of concern is the impact on the maritime environment. That increasing tensions in the maritime security landscape inevitably have. There is the maritime environment degradation, artificial island making, land reclamation. All these actions have an impact on the marine environment, whether it's damage to the coral reefs. And the Philippines, for example, were located in the Coral Triangle. So this is one area of really rich and vast and very diverse marine life, which unfortunately are caught somewhere in the middle of all these tensions, all these developments in the maritime landscape. And we made that point very clear actually last year. I won't go into great detail when the Philippines made its own submission to the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea for an advisory opinion on the effect of climate change and the oceans. And for us, it was a very important exercise, and it was also a manifestation of how the PCA tribunal ruling is now being cited, not just by the Philippines, but by other like-minded countries in terms of assessing the impact of maritime security concerns on the marine environment. The fourth issue for us, fourth area of concern for us is maritime governance. We are talking about porous borders. We are talking about overlapping territorial claims, which to some extent impede or hinder or restrict or complicate negotiations in terms of cooperation for maritime governance, in terms of efforts to respond to transnational challenges, such as trafficking of goods, trafficking of persons, piracy. So all these things are part of the ecosystem which we are trying our best to respond to in various ways. So for the Philippines, of primary concern, the primary approach is, of course, to champion international law and the value of international law and the impact of which is being eroded. And we see that developing now. We see assertive and coercive and aggressive actions which infringe on legally established rights under international law. And we know for a country like the Philippines, which does not have the same resources as other major maritime powers, for us, international law provides us with the ammunition, the ballast, to make our case, to continue to advocate for a rules-based international order, to continue to advocate for the primacy of international legal instruments, and the findings of tribunals, international tribunals, for our case, to build our case. And we feel it's very important in terms of freedom, safeguarding freedom of navigation and overflight, in terms of making sure that there is unimpeded access and flow of maritime commerce. But at the same time, we ourselves know that we have a responsibility to also exercise self-restraint in the conduct of the activities. We don't want to add to the tension. In fact, we want to help de-escalate tensions. We know our legal obligations and we stand by our legal obligations under international law. Of course, we also have to work on, and we are working on building a network of like-minded countries in terms of championing the importance of international law, in terms of advocating for peaceful dialogue. We have been we're very fortunate that we have a growing number of partners in this particular aspect. Of course, we have our traditional treaty allies, we have our traditional security partners, the United States, Japan, Australia, but also newer partners. India, for example. We've begun work on joint exercises and more dialogues in terms of maritime security. France is a valued partner also in this aspect, and there are newer partners such as New Zealand, Canada, and in the last 3 years, actually, the Republic of Korea. Which we are pleased to note has gone out of its usual comfort zone in terms of global engagement and regional engagement, and has actually been joining us and participating and engaging with us on this very important issue. And of course, aside from that, aside from building these partnerships with like-minded countries, we've also established mechanisms for continued and open dialogue with China through a bilateral consultative mechanism. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but we have to do it. We have to keep the dialogue open on various aspects of our relationship. And we hope that this will continue and will help to discourage and restrain provocative actions, which only add to the tension in the area. Lastly, it's also very important for us to develop our own capability, our own capacity building through a self-reliant defense posture and through an ongoing, defense modernization program, where we've also been fortunate to have close partnership with other like-minded countries. So let me end there, and just to give you an overall picture of how we're dealing with the challenges in the evolving global maritime landscape. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We've got just over 30 minutes, and I have a long list of questions that I want to ask, and I want to make sure that I give some time for you and the audience to ask questions so you've got them as well. But given the fact that we're here in Korea, that we've been kindly hosted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and kindly hosted today by the Jeju Forum, I wonder if I might ask you all to give some thoughts specifically to what this means for Korea. And you've already started on that, Mrs. Ambassador. You started talking about, Korea being a like-minded partner. But given the particular challenges that the Philippines face, what more do you want from Korea? What areas do you think that Korea is a like-minded partner on this? And what do these maritime security disputes and challenges mean for a country like Korea?
Do you know there's been sort of I've been here for 4 years, and in this time frame, I've seen the the posture, the positioning of Korea evolve. When Korea came out with its Indo-Pacific policy, there was a much clearer language and perspective on how to deal with various aspects of engagement with the Indo-Pacific. And for the Philippines in particular, we found it very encouraging that under the Indo-Pacific policy of Korea, there has been a particular emphasis on political and security engagement and cooperation. It's also reflected in the ASEAN-Korea Strategic Initiative, or the KASI, the Korea-ASEAN Strategic Initiative, which is sort of like, I wouldn't say a sister, like a subunit of the Indo-Pacific policy of Korea. And again, there is an attempt to balance Korea's engagement with the region with ASEAN, for example, but also with the different ASEAN member states. So bilaterally, you can see the shifting perspective here in terms of balancing what was largely a functional cooperation engagement with countries in the sub-region in ASEAN to also encompass political insecurity, in particular maritime cooperation. I believe Korea is now embarking on a series of maritime cooperation dialogues. We were actually the first maritime cooperation dialogue of Korea. We launched our bilateral maritime cooperation dialogue mechanism in 2022, the first of Korea with an ASEAN country, and sort of like a template for future bilateral maritime bilateral cooperation mechanisms. And it has helped greatly in strengthening engagement and cooperation in terms of maritime domain awareness and all that entails, from capacity building to exchange of information and best practices to being more vocal and present in terms of national statements on maritime security, on the South China Sea issue, for example. Korea has issued national statements on certain incidences which it feels have served to question or to impact the international rules-based order, and we'd like to see that continue. Of course, Korea is now undergoing a political transition, but we hope that this trajectory, this policy trajectory, will continue and will strengthen. Personally, I'm not particular about nomenclature. Whoever will be running the government in about a week or so, but it is the policy which we find to be very valuable.
Well, thank you very much. Admiral, if there's a broad arc of the Indo-Pacific, and India is on one end, Korea and Japan are kind of the other end, India has a very important and growing security relationship with Vietnam, as we heard, with the Philippines as well. Some Indo-Pacific agreements with Indonesia as well. I want to ask you that same question. What do you think that India would want from Korea and the Indo-Pacific? What are the implications of what you described, not just in the Indian Ocean, but in the broader region, mean for Korea from your perspective?
Thank you, Gordon. Yeah, so the Republic of Korea, of course, is a very important country globally. And as far as India is concerned, it's been a very old partner. Initially, to start off with, in the commercial field, as I mentioned yesterday, also we have a large number of Korean companies doing very well in India. Hyundai, Samsung, LG, they're household names. The defense cooperation between India and South Korea has only blossomed over the past few years. It has been a very welcome development. We have signed a memorandum of understanding between the Ministry of Defense in India and the Ministry of Defense in the Republic of Korea. There has also been a MOU and close cooperation between the two Coast Guards, the Indian Coast Guard and the Korean Coast Guard. And there are now regular exercises, there are training exchanges also occasionally that happen. But particularly when the South Korean ships come to the Indian Ocean for the anti-piracy patrols or for any other deployment, you see a regular visit to Indian ports and exchange of ideas and views with the Indian Navy. As far as the India's concept of South Korea is concerned, as I mentioned, it's a very important partner. We have a huge amount of trade which passes through the South China Sea, bilateral trade. India is looking at the Republic of Korea as a partner of choice, both the ROK as also Japan, for shipbuilding in India, as also for MRO of US and other Western ships who are operating in the Indian Ocean region. And I think this is being progressed quite rapidly. The government of India has given it a priority, and the ROK itself is very, very keen on this. So as I see the increasing trade and the interaction that is there between the two countries, not to speak about, we always mention about the cultural similarity. One of the queens of Korea is an Indian by descent. came here more than 1400 years ago. And so when the temple to Lord Rama was inaugurated, she was present, the descendant was present at the inauguration and the foundation laying ceremony. So there is a very strong cultural connection between India and Korea. So I think what we would like to see really is more ROK involvement in the Indo-Pacific. I have been proposing from my side that the Quad should include, in the future, an expanded Quad should include the ROK as well. And particularly their participation in the IPMDA, formal participation, though I mean they're already partners in that, would be very helpful. And in brief, more active participation in the security affairs of ROK would be welcomed. They've got a very, very capable Navy. We have a very healthy respect for the ROK Navy. They're very professional. Their ships are very good. The quality of ship construction is world class. So I think we have a lot to learn there, and a lot of cooperation is possible.
Oh, fantastic. Dr. Julian, you did a wonderful job in your initial remarks of making it clear that one of the reasons Europe has a vested interest in the rules-based order, the maritime security, is economic. And obviously, Korea is a very important trade and investment partner with Europe. But on top of that, they're also a member of the AP4 with NATO, right? So there is a security element to it as well. So I'll ask you the same questions. What do you think the implications of it from a European perspective are for Korea? And then what is it that Europe would like to see more of in cooperation with Korea on maritime security?
Yeah, sure. Let's start with security. I think that South Korea is a strategic actor in the region. It's a neighbor of DPRK, very close to China, very close to Russia. So it has a point of view. You know, it has a assessment capability that is very precious, and so that's why South Korea is a partner of NATO, part of the IP4, and this is very important to share our experiences, to have access to how South Korean strategists see the region, the evolution of the region, and a region which is fast changing. Just a year ago, less than a year ago, Russia signed a treaty alliance with DPRK. This is a massive change strategically. There is also a reconfiguration of the relationship between the PRC, Russia, DPRK, perhaps also, and hopefully it will continue, between South Korea and Japan and the United States. So it's time to engage more, to share experience and again have access to South Korean assessment of the region and where it goes. South Korea is also a technological power, which is very important in the global economy of tech, but also in Europe. South Korea is very capable in the automotive sector, but also in the electronics, in the semiconductors area, which is also something that we want to develop or improve in Europe. So there is a field of cooperation which is very important here right now, especially because we also face some risk when it comes to the automotive industry, for instance, coming from China. So again, we need friends and partners to improve our capability. Another very important aspect is that South Korea has also a very powerful defense industry, more and more powerful, and this is something that is also welcome. Probably know that South Korea now is a weapon supplier in Europe, which is something that is kind of welcome because Europe has some defense industries. France has a pretty good defense industry, but which was not capable of delivering as fast as we wish the armed systems that Ukraine needs and Ukraine needed. And so it was kind of welcome that South Korea was able to deliver off-the-shelf system to Poland, for instance, for Poland to ramp up its national defense, facing an increasing threat coming from Russia. And so there are some other fields of cooperation that are rising in the defense industry area. And last but not least, if South Korea is a tech power, perhaps that South Korea is a cultural superpower. And this is something that we cannot and we must not overlook, because in France, and I think it's true across Europe, it's a very, very important cultural partner. The French youth is keen in the South Korean culture, and this is something that is growing, and we understand why. So this is also something that we need to engage more. More and more people in France are learning South Korean. So this is also a field where we need to work more. Having said that, the positive side of things, the potential that there is between Europe and South Korea. I would subscribe to what Ambassador said about perhaps the need or the expectation in Europe for South Korea to do more, to say more. I started saying that we need to have to exchange, to compare notes with South Korean strategists. We also expecting that South Korean strategists move forward and perhaps speak up about what's happening in the region. How do they consider, what do they intend to do, even behind closed doors? Especially there is a very concerning situation surrounding Taiwan. What is South Korea's position on that? In the South China Sea as well, it's really not so far away from their shores, and also they have interest. Just like Europe has interest in maritime routes and supply chain going through the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, and as Admiral Chola said, also for India's supply chain, it's the same on the other side. South Korea needs those maritime routes.
Well, thank you very much, and I particularly appreciate your focusing on South Korea's industrial might, manufacturing capability, defense industry, and technology. So we can talk about maritime security, but it rests on a foundation of ships and technology. So the Korean role is very important there. I would also point out, I had the great fortune of being at the Munich Security Conference in February, and if it hadn't been for a speech by J.D. Vance, I think the focus of that conference would have been that there is no longer a meaningful difference between the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific. With North Korean troops fighting in Ukraine, with Chinese ships cutting communication cables in the Baltic, with British and French and Italian and German and other military vessels in this region here, it really is a global challenge we're facing. I'm going to turn to you last, Dr. Cardon. Korea is a treaty ally of the United States, but you've also looked at this perspective from a Chinese perspective, where Korea has a very important trading and investment relationship with China as well. Given your unique perspective, both from Washington and understanding what China is doing, what do you expect more of Korea? And what do you think Korea should take away from our conversation about Indo-Pacific maritime security?
Thanks, Gordon. Well, I think it's impossible to ignore at this moment the Chinese activities in the West Sea, or in the Yellow Sea, as we typically call it, in Washington. And I think that the alliance between Korea and the United States has obviously revolved around the challenges from North Korea, and appropriately so. And in a lot of ways, it's that conflict with North Korea that's defined the nature of the U.S. security involvement in the region to begin with. I'm sure folks in this room are familiar with the Atchison line drawn in 1950 before the invasion of the Republic of Korea, in which the United States expressed a much more indifference to what happened beyond its immediate position in Japan. And I think there's an interesting echo of that today. Not that the Chinese fishing structures in the West Sea, or no sail or no fly zone, which we've been watching intently, are anything equivalent to the initiation of hostilities, but rather that the fact of the maritime domain and the shared challenges in it make it very, very difficult to disaggregate between what's the nature of our alliance relationship, what are the concerns that we're going to respond to. And going back to the earlier remarks I made about what are the more likely sets of contingencies that we're going to see in the region that are going to put strain on alliances and partnerships and demand collective security and decision making. The potential for a major economic crisis resulting from a standoff around, a fisheries platform or a loss of life in the South China Sea is the sort of thing that's going to be impossible to just sort of carve out and say, as Korea, this is not part of our security relationship with the United States or with other partners. We're focused on something else because of the interdependence of the entire global economy. We're in a position now in which obviously disruptions to flows out of Taiwan have great consequences for semiconductors and therefore every single device operating in the world today. But you name any country in the region or any sort of combination of countries, and what you find is that Korea, like every other country in the region, is going to have some very concrete interests at stake and is going to be called upon to use what capabilities it has. And we've noted some of the really extraordinary strengths that Korea brings to the table. And I think in the context of a security environment that's much more fluid than it has been, I would hazard to say, looking around the room, in all of our lifetimes, I don't see any World War II veterans here, I don't think. I think we're in the process now of testing out the nature of that post-war security architecture. And again, I don't think we have the luxury of saying, well, we have this narrow set of interests, and I'm not even singling out Korea in this sense. I think every country has a much narrower set of what are my concrete national security interests, what am I prepared to do to defend them, and it won't be until the event that we'll really be challenged to think about, well, what are the implications for these global supply chains on which we all depend? How much risk are we going to be willing to take in order to secure what seem to be the immediate interests of our neighbor, whether it's in Japan or in the Philippines or in Taiwan, and how is that going to sort of boomerang back to us? And I think it's going to be very, very difficult in the moment to make those determinations, and I think that's why discussions like this, really trying to take stock of the nature of the challenges and the interconnections between them, are going to be really essential. It's certain that all these alliances and partnerships are going to be tested in this space, and I think the more that we can kind of think concretely about what are the nature of those challenges, the better served we're all going to be.
Well, thank you. Let me abuse my role as chair, but to share a little bit of an Australian perspective here, because Australia is one of these countries that's actually an Indo-Pacific country. We have an East Coast that's on the South Pacific, and we have a very historic, important role in the South Pacific, in Oceania. But we also have an Indian Ocean side. I live in Perth, which we often call Australia's Indian Ocean capital. So the Indo-Pacific is kind of a region in which we're central to. And it's in that context that I'll answer the question in terms of Australia's views of Korea. I would note that other than the United States, Australia is the only other country with which Korea has a 2+2 annual meeting with both ministers of defense and ministers of foreign affairs, and a burgeoning security relationship. And listening to the comments made here, I would think they would be echoed in every part of the Australia-Korea discourse, including industry. Korea has been a very important and growing partner in Australia's defense industry, and I anticipate that will continue to grow. The only thing I would probably add here is that we're in an environment right now where the environment that Isaac in particular laid out very well is one in which everybody has a deep concern, not about the rise of China. We all have benefited tremendously from the rise of China. We have aided and abetted the rise of China. So it's not so much about the rise. It's really about the changing use of Chinese power, and in recent years in particular. That's an area of deep concern, and there are new anxieties about the United States and what trajectory the United States is on, and whether or not we still have a foundation of a rules-based order built on security, which had largely been provided by the United States. And that's really important to treaty allies like the Philippines, treaty allies like France and NATO, treaty allies like Australia, and important security partners like India. And so if you look at that from a Korean perspective, Korea has a role to play, and I think probably everyone in this panel would agree, we all want more Korea. The ambassador kept using the frame like-minded partners, like-minded partners. We're in an era where like-minded partners are going to have to be much more proactive about working together to hold on to whatever vestiges of the rules-based order we can in the interim as we hope for a better world to come. Now look, I have a lot of questions and we only got just 15 minutes left. I am going to open it up to see if there's any questions we've got in the audience before we do it, and we do have one gentleman in the far back there. Just briefly, identify yourself, and then if you ask
thank you very
short
much.
questions.
My name is Kenichi Doi from a think tank called Institute of Geoeconomics, based in Tokyo. And I have a question about the collaboration between US and Korea, or possibly Japan, in terms of this shipbuilding. Because as anyone knows, China has a formidable manufacturing capability of shipbuilding, and now Trump administration has aware of this. And on the other hand, Korea and Japan is also we are the powerful shipbuilding countries. So my question would be which specific subfields or its plan to in terms of the shipbuilding manufacturing between our allies. Okay, thank you.
We might start with you, Isaac, and then I've got something to add to that. We'll see if anybody else wants to add to that as well.
Sure. Well, this is certainly a highly relevant subject, and it's not just because of the administration in Washington's fixation on the question, but rather because of how much China's rise has changed this space. And I think, 20 years ago, it wouldn't have made any sense to talk about, excuse me, got a fly chasing me here. Only 20 years ago, it wouldn't have made any sense to have a conversation about China and shipbuilding. They had barely any capacity, and it wasn't putting any pressure on anybody else. And at that stage, I think the big discussion would have been the competition between Japan and Korea. Korea was on its way to having a larger market share than Japan, and China went to school on the efforts of both of its Northeast Asian neighbors and has done this at a scale and at a pace that's unimaginable. I think that's what's driving this discussion. Now, there's a commercial and a naval side of this, and from my perspective, the questions about reconstituting U.S. shipbuilding capacity in the commercial space, I think, are not all that strategic. There is not an existing shipbuilding base for constructing things like LNG tankers, like they produce at such extraordinary quality and pace here in Korea, or all of the other modern commercial vessels that both Japan and Korea, and actually the Philippines is a major shipbuilder as well, excel in. The United States is very, very far behind, and I think no amount of executive orders are going to resolve some of those fundamental structural issues. I think the areas where U.S., Japan, Korea cooperation is most necessary and most achievable is in the naval shipbuilding domain. And we've already seen a variety of ways in which the U.S. Navy, which has historically been very, very sort of closed off in the sense of not doing ship repairs, overhauls, maintenance, and certainly not shipbuilding in foreign yards, has recognized that over the course of the post-Cold War period, our capacity to produce the number of ships that are required to maintain a balance of power in East Asia, which I think is sort of the fundamental driver here, or a balance of power in the Indo-Pacific, has eroded considerably, whereas the capacity of allies, in particular Japan and Korea, has increased pretty substantially. And not only that, I think one of the really extraordinary features of this alliance system is just how interoperable a lot of these systems are. And without getting too wonky about it, it's really important to recognize that Korea, Japan, and the United States all operate the same theater air defense systems, this Aegis systems that are really essential to deterring China, to dealing with the fact that one of the most significant things that China has achieved in terms of its military modernization has been in the space of long-range precision strike and missiles that can really give everybody in the region a bad day or a bad year or a bad couple decades. And I think where the U.S. defense or naval shipbuilding base is at its most exquisite and capable is in these nuclear-powered vessels like aircraft carriers and submarines. And I think it makes a lot of sense to think about the alliance as a way of creating a division of labor across the alliance and seeking the comparative advantage of the various players in it. And there's clearly an immense comparative advantage here in Korea in building very high-quality commercial and naval ships. And I think the naval ship area is where that cooperation should be most focused. There's no great demand for the United States to have a shipbuilding base. Maybe you need to reflag ships with an American flag for certain purposes, but that doesn't require them to be built by U.S. labor or in American yards. Logically, it does by statute in the United States. So I would really like to see this area of cooperation expand. It may be that naval combatants are a very high bar, and I don't think that's the starting point. I would imagine things like oilers and other auxiliaries might be a really an interesting place to start and explore the ability to have U.S. flagged naval ships that are built and maintained in foreign yards. I think they'd be co-built. I imagine there will be some significant U.S. Presence there. Certainly the U.S. Navy Sea Systems is not going to just give up its essentially monopoly control on how this works. But I think there's really a lot of scope for cooperation. I'm really excited to be here in Korea talking to people about it. I'd like to go to Japan as well and have a similar conversation. One last thing, I'll throw in icebreakers as a really important potential area of cooperation. So I think, these are things that really play to the strengths of this global alliance system. China alone has much more capacity than anybody does individually, but aggregated together collectively, this alliance system has a lot more capacity and is much more resilient, I think, than it may feel at certain moments.
Well, thank you. If I can add very briefly to that, and then I want to go to the ambassador as well as the admiral on that front. Traditionally, Korea and Japan view themselves almost exclusively as competitors. But that was a conceit of the post-Cold War era. And we are no longer in the post-Cold War era. We're in an era of geostrategic competition. And I think both Japanese and Korean shipbuilders have recognized they're no longer competitive at the lower end of the spectrum. Building basic bulk carriers, they can't compete with China on that front. So both Japanese and Korean shipbuilders are trying to move up the value chain. Icebreakers, LNG carriers, maybe hydrogen carriers, and there's no more higher value add area of shipbuilding than defense. It just requires that in terms of the process. And so I do think that there is a cultural change that has to happen where Korea and Japan have to view each other, if not direct collaboration, but with the same mission in terms of that process. And so in the case of Australia, we have an open bid for our next generation of frigates, our future frigate program. Both Hanwha Ocean and Hyundai Heavy were competing on that. I had a great chance to visit the Hyundai Heavy shipyards last year. Really impressive, largest shipyard in the world, but they are also moving up the value chain just in terms of their capability on that front, in terms of that process. But right now, the two finalists are a German shipbuilding company, ThyssenKrupp, and Mitsubishi Heavy. And I have been struck by how much the culture in Japan has changed. traditionally, defense industry in Japan was entirely 100% domestic. And the cultural shift that's taking place within ATLA, within the Ministry of Defense, within the Prime Minister's office, and even within Mitsubishi Heavy to enable Japan to compete on a serious basis for the Future Frigates program, I think is a model of things going forward. Now, I do want to bring in the ambassador first and foremost because, as mentioned, Philippines not only has an extremely and growingly more capable Navy, but they're a very important shipbuilder in their own right. The largest shipbuilder we have in Australia, Austal, has a major shipyard in the Philippines. And while I think it's actually Korea that got the bid for the defense vessels, right now that shipyard in Austal is building the largest ferry in history. It is being built in the Filipino shipyard. So there's tremendous capability there.
Well, yes, thank you for that. I'm just as excited as most people on the panel for shipbuilding, maintenance, repair, and overhaul, the MRO technology, and moving forward, even green shipping, which is also very important. As I think, if we can move this partnership, this engagement, and cooperation forward, it will be a very impactful and very real testament to what we can do in terms of building these unilateral alliances. Currently, the gentleman from Japan, you have a trilateral, mechanism with the U.S. And Korea. And the Philippines also has a similar trilateral mechanism with the U.S. and Japan. And there's, I'm sure there's no way that these are just mutually exclusive arrangements or relationships, that we can work in different ways in areas and in sectors where we can align on a lot of things and really show a real impact, both in terms of security, both in terms of the economics of it all. And I think shipbuilding is one area where we can do that and where we can bring in other potential partners. You mentioned Austal in the Philippines. Well, if you look at the global shipbuilding landscape, I think the lay of the land at present is 45% market share for China, about 30% for Korea, 15% for Japan. And then you have smaller shipbuilding countries. At fourth or fifth place, it's usually either the Philippines or Vietnam. And in our case, we're really now trying to grow the shipbuilding industry. Korea has a presence now in the shipbuilding ecosystem in the Philippines. Hyundai KSOE has already established a presence in the former U.S. Naval Base in Subic, which is now a commercial shipbuilding area. We have Austal, we have Tsuneshi, I believe, from Japan in Cebu. And I think in terms of the synergy in what we want to do and how we see the shipbuilding industry grow, I think there's a lot of potential and a real impact in showing how unilateral and smaller alliances can bridge other partners to have a positive impact in this very critical sector.
Well, thank you. There's always a temptation just to look at the sheer numbers coming out of China and the pace there and be a little bit despondent. But the reality is, if you look at collectively what's happening in Europe, both historically, what's happening in Korea, Japan, Australia, the Philippines, etc., there's a collective strength there that I think we kind of underestimate in terms of that process. If you look at the collective effort between Russia, which is not particularly excelling in manufacturing at this point, or Iran, or North Korea has had some very recent problems with its shipbuilding, or at least ship launching in terms of the process, I think we can have some confidence. But I can't let this go without turning to Admiral Chawla, because obviously this is an area of cooperation you've already identified, but potential real sea change capacity in terms of India's role in this process. I wonder if you might address that.
Yeah, so India has got a very capable warship building industry. We build and design and build. So we have got our own in-house design department from nuclear submarines to aircraft carriers and everything in between. But this doesn't really translate to commercial shipbuilding. And in commercial shipbuilding, there are just 2 or 3 yards in India which are building ships. And it's not really commensurate with the capacity and the capability that is available because of the cost effectiveness of India, particularly because of its cheap and skilled labor force. And therefore, the government has recently, about 2 years back, set up a $250 billion maritime development fund with the aim of developing 2 mega shipbuilding parks. And both Japan and the Republic of Korea have been identified as partners. And the discussions are proceeding at a pretty advanced stage with them. And I think this will bear fruit because this is an area where there is a huge amount of scope for expansion. So India aims to induct close to 1,000 odd commercial vessels over the next 25 years into its fleets. That's the macro target that has been set. And there are existing shipyards and greenfield shipyards that have been identified, which can be developed. So I think there is an immense scope here. And I had recently, with my organization, written a paper for India ROK Shipbuilding Cooperation, which was given to the MOFA with the facts and figures. And I think this is something that India is looking forward to with great deal of excitement. And I would think that a part of that would also translate into greater efficiency to our warship building yards as well, which are doing well, but which need to deliver ships in faster pace time and have better machinery and infrastructure there. So I think it'll be a mutually a win-win situation. And the MRO cooperation already is a possibility between India, US, and the ROK.
Mark, I don't want to leave you out of the conversation. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can just add that France also has quite a significant expertise and know-how in shipbuilding, especially naval ship. But our shipyards, but a bit like in the US, our shipyards are packed. We cannot produce anymore, and for the coming years. So the way that we can share this expertise and spread our know-how is to cooperate with other countries. India is a very important example because now India is autonomously producing the French design Scorpions, and this is something that we can, if we are not able to produce as many ships, surface ships or submarines in France, we may be able to produce them overseas. It is the case in India. It could be the case elsewhere, or it could also. We can also imagine a way that with like trilateral or cooperation, for example, France and India to produce some kind of ships for other countries. So this is something that we can imagine, and France is ready to do that, I guess.
Look, we only got to one question, and we didn't even start my long list of personal questions here. But we're already past time. We've already kind of reached the time. I think we were supposed to stop right at 6:40. But I do want to thank everybody for coming from the audience. I want to again thank the Jeju Forum for hosting us, and I want to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for bringing us all together. We started out on a very broad level, talking about the theoretical underpinnings of maritime security, sea lines of communication, the rule of law as it impacts it, how that impacts commerce, how that impacts national interests. We talked about some very specific examples in terms of Chinese strategy, how it impacts the Philippines, but also the roles of countries like France and India, or even Australia in that process. And we ended up on a very appropriate level because it immediately becomes very clear that you cannot have maritime domain awareness without ships. You can't have maritime security without ships. You can't even have all this great technology without the platforms on which they're based. And so I hope you got out of this some insights for the expectations of Korea, the current role and the future role of Korea when it comes to the Indo-Pacific maritime security environment. But if nothing else, I hope our Korean audience in particular got away from this panel that whether you're in the Philippines or India or France or the United States or Australia, there is a growing hope, expectation, anticipation of Korea playing a very important role in Indo-Pacific maritime security. So on behalf of the organizer of the panel, MOFA, thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking this magnificent panel for their remarks.